Peter never imagined his life would take such an unexpected turn. A man dedicated to his work, a former marketing manager, he always believed he was in control. However, when the economic crisis hit, he was one of the first victims. Losing his job was a blow, but losing the roof over his head was devastating. He and Sophie, his 7-year-old daughter, found themselves homeless, wandering the city in search of shelter anywhere that could offer them protection from the cold and rain. The days in the temporary shelter seemed endless. Peter did what he could to keep hope alive in Sophie's heart, but inside, his own determination wavered. He took small odd jobs here and there, but nothing that guaranteed stability. All he wanted was a safe place for Sophie to sleep, eat, and smile again. The weight of being a father while feeling powerless consumed him, yet he remained firm. Every night, he repeated to himself that somehow he would find a way out. A rainy afternoon marked a turning point in Peter's story. The heavy drops falling from the sky seemed to reflect the sadness he felt inside. He and Sophie, tired, hungry, and soaked, sought refuge in a small cafe downtown. The smell of hot coffee mixed with freshly baked bread filled their noses, and for a moment, Peter forgot his worries. As Sophie shivered from the cold, he hugged her, trying to pass on what little warmth remained in his body. Inside, the dim lights created a cozy atmosphere, though the place was nearly empty except for a figure behind the counter. Peter hesitated, looking around. He didn't want to be a bother but needed to shelter Sophie from the rain. Taking a deep breath, he found the courage to step into the cafe, hoping the owner wouldn't throw them out for clearly having no money to buy anything. Like in many situations over the past months, he was at the mercy of another's kindness. When Peter and Sophie entered, Carla, the cafe owner, observed them intently. She felt a pang in her heart upon seeing their condition: drenched clothes, tired eyes, and yet a quiet dignity. The cafe, empty and on the brink of closing, felt even lonelier on that rainy day. Carla had her own problems, but something about those two touched her deeply. Without much thought, she offered them a hot meal. Peter, initially hesitant, accepted, expressing his gratitude with a look, while Sophie, hungry, shyly devoured her plate. Carla knew what it meant to fight against adversity. Her cafe, once the community's gathering spot, was now nearly forgotten. Bills were piling up, and sleepless nights wondering how to save the business became increasingly frequent. Yet, seeing Sophie smile with each bite, Carla found herself offering more than just food. She asked Peter if he and Sophie would like to stay in the small upstairs room she rarely used. Peter was surprised, unsure of how to react to such generosity. As Peter helped Sophie up the stairs, Carla reflected on what she had just done. She could barely pay her own bills, but something about their situation awakened a compassion in her that she couldn't ignore. Peter and Sophie needed help, and she understood what it meant to be alone in difficult times. Offering that space, even if small and simple, felt like the right thing to do. Besides, she couldn't help but wonder if Peter might, in some way, help save the cafe too. Peter, lying beside Sophie that night, felt torn between gratitude and worry. Carla's kindness had touched him deeply, but he knew it couldn't last forever. How could he repay her? It was clear Carla faced her own battles. Despite the cafe's cozy atmosphere, it was empty, and Carla's expression, despite her attempts to hide it, showed exhaustion and concern. Peter felt that something had to be done, but did he have the strength? The following days in the cafe were a mix of relief and tension. Peter and Sophie adjusted to the small room, and Carla seemed genuinely happy to have them around. But the cafe's financial struggles were becoming more evident. Peter, with his sharp eye as a former marketing manager, began noticing small details: the outdated menu, the decor that no longer attracted people, and the lack of promotion. He knew there was potential in the place, but did he have the courage to suggest something? Carla couldn't ignore their presence either. Peter, with his experience, seemed like the right person to help her, but she didn't want to ask. There was something prideful in not accepting help, in wanting to solve everything alone, but the situation was becoming too critical for that. Each day the cafe stayed empty, she felt the weight of the mounting debts even more. Silently, she watched Peter working small side jobs and Sophie playing around the tables, while the idea of asking for help began to take form in her mind. Over time, The conversations between Peter and Carla became more frequent. They talked about the cafe, the city, life. Peter shared his marketing experience, and Carla, though initially reluctant, began to see a possibility in him. One night, after a long day without any customers, she finally opened up. She told Peter about the debts, about how she was considering closing the cafe. Peter listened silently, and at the end, asked himself, "Could I help?" Carla's generosity had given Peter and Sophie a second chance, but now he felt the need to give back. He knew he had the skills to help Carla, but recent months had eroded his confidence. How could he, who had failed in so many things lately, make a difference here? This doubt gnawed at him, but at the same time, the idea of standing by while Carla faced this alone seemed impossible. Something had to change, and he knew this moment of uncertainty was a turning point. The rain continued to fall outside, and the cafe remained empty. Peter looked at Sophie, asleep in his arms, and felt the weight of responsibility. Perhaps Carla's generosity was the push he needed to believe in himself again. After all, he had a daughter to protect, and now a debt of gratitude to repay. The question was, would he have the courage to take on the challenge that lay before him? As the days passed, the quiet tension between Peter and Carla grew. They knew something had to be done, but both hesitated. Carla was one step away from closing the cafe, and Peter couldn't shake the idea that he could help, although his confidence was still fragile. One afternoon, after an especially empty day, Peter gathered his courage. Sitting with Carla, he finally broke the silence. "What if I could help save the cafe?" he asked, with a mix of determination and doubt in his voice. Carla looked at him for a moment, surprised. She knew Peter had marketing experience, but she didn't expect him to offer his help, especially after everything he had been through. Still, there was something in his look that made her listen. Peter began talking about his ideas: themed promotions, community events, a refreshed menu. He knew the cafe needed more than just customers. It needed to reclaim its place in the community. And Peter, more than ever, was determined to make that happen. Even as Peter spoke, insecurity haunted his mind. Would he be able to turn things around? After so many failures, this was his chance at redemption, but the fear of failing again was overwhelming. However, something about his bond with Sophie and the gratitude he felt for Carla pushed him forward. He knew this might be his only chance to secure a future for his daughter. Carla, on the other hand, was torn. Peter's ideas made sense, but she feared it might be too late to save the cafe. Seeing Carla's hesitation, Peter reinforced his proposal. He didn't just want to save the cafe as a place to stay. He wanted to give all of them a new chance. In exchange for his help, he and Sophie could continue living upstairs until things stabilized. Carla knew she had to make a decision. The situation was critical, and the debts wouldn't wait much longer. With a heavy heart and a nod, she agreed. Their partnership was sealed with a deep sigh. From that moment, a spark of hope lit up in Peter's heart. He knew the journey wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in months, he had a clear goal: save the cafe and give Sophie the future she deserved. The nights once filled with anxiety now turned into planning sessions. Peter stayed up late, crafting strategies, drafting new proposals for the cafe, and bit by bit, his determination grew. Each small idea seemed to bring a new breath of life, not only to the cafe but to him as well. Carla watched Peter closely. She had never seen someone work so tirelessly, especially someone who, like her, also faced so many challenges. Peter was willing to risk everything to ensure the cafe flourished. Despite the debt's pressure, Carla began to feel something she hadn't experienced in a long time: hope. She saw in Peter a chance not only to save the cafe but to regain something she had lost over the years: faith in the future. The next step was putting their ideas into action. Peter knew it wouldn't be easy, but he was determined. His first proposal was to create themed events at the cafe, something that would attract families, friends, and the local community. He suggested live music nights, days with special menus, and even a small local craft fair to give visibility to the cafe. Carla, though still somewhat skeptical, accepted the plan. She knew she had nothing left to lose, and trusting Peter seemed the only way out. The first themed event was a live music night, something Peter believed could draw in the townspeople. Inspired by memories of the cafe's vibrant past, he wanted to bring back that sense of community. The lights were carefully adjusted to create a welcoming atmosphere, and small decor changes added a touch of novelty to the space. Sophie, always curious and full of energy, helped where she could, carrying napkins and arranging tables with an enthusiastic smile. The first night was a modest success. Some curious neighbors came to check it out, and the music brought a lightness that had been missing for a long time. Peter watched with a mix of relief and anxiety. Although it wasn't the crowd he hoped for, seeing the cafe come alive again was a small triumph. However, he knew the road would be long. With each new challenge that arose, he had to remember why he was doing it all. Not just for the cafe but for Sophie, for Carla, and for the sense of renewal that was beginning to bloom within him. Despite the initial modest success, challenges soon followed. The local community, used to the old cafe, was still resistant to change. Many preferred their familiar routines and were skeptical of Peter's new ideas. Why change what we already know? Some would ask. Carla, on her part, felt the weight of responsibility. The bills remained a constant threat, and even though the events brought some activity, the cafe still didn't generate enough to cover the debts. The pressure mounted with each passing week, and Peter began to question if he could keep the plan going. To make matters worse, some promotions didn't work out. Peter organized a craft fair to attract more people, but unexpected rains scared the customers away. Carla, watching the few customers they had leaving without even looking inside, nearly broke down. Peter tried to stay optimistic, but inside, the fear of failure started to creep in. He knew he couldn't afford too many more mistakes. Every failed attempt meant more lost time, and time was something they didn't have in abundance. Yet, amid the hardships, there were small moments of light. Sophie, with her joy and innocence, charmed the few customers who still came. She created colorful posters to announce the events and helped distribute flyers around town. Her contagious enthusiasm was a constant reminder to Peter of why he couldn't give up. Carla, too, although initially skeptical, began to trust Peter more. She saw how hard he worked and how his relationship with Sophie made him even more determined to succeed. The challenges weren't limited to the cafe. Peter and Carla also faced their internal dilemmas. The financial pressure consumed them, but there was also a growing feeling between them that, while comforting, was also frightening. Peter, amid the chaos of the cafe and his search for a new life, began to realize that perhaps his feelings for Carla went beyond a simple work partnership. However, he feared complicating things even further. After all, his priority was still to secure a home for Sophie, and mixing personal feelings could jeopardize everything. With each event, the tension increased, but so did the feeling that they were on the right track. The cafe, though not fully revitalized, was starting to catch the community's attention. Peter, always focused on finding new ways to attract customers, proposed a family game night, and Carla, initially reluctant, agreed. The idea was simple, but it worked. Slowly, people began to feel more comfortable in the new environment of the cafe. However, the bills remained a constant shadow, and Peter knew they needed more than temporary success to save the business. As the cafe began to regain momentum, something deeper was also unfolding between Peter and Carla. They got to know each other better, sharing more than just business concerns. Peter talked to Carla about his time as a marketing manager, the life he had before everything fell apart, and the enormous responsibility of caring for Sophie. Carla, in turn, shared the cafe's stories, how that place was the heart of her family, and how losing it would feel like losing a part of herself. Each night, after Sophie fell asleep, Peter and Carla spent time together in the cafe, talking about life, laughing about the day's little events. That partnership, which began with a practical goal, was turning into something deeper. Peter, despite all the difficulties, began to accept that he saw Carla in a different light. There was something about her that made him feel a sense of security and lightness he hadn't experienced in a long time. And little by little, he accepted that his feelings for her went beyond gratitude. Carla, on the other hand, also couldn't ignore the growing connection she felt with Peter. The fact that he was there, helping without asking for anything in return, moved her. This man who had lost so much in life but still held on to a quiet determination had become a constant presence in her thoughts. However, She knew the cafe and Sophie were his priorities, and Carla didn't want to complicate the situation. Both carried the burden of their responsibilities, but at the same time, they found in each other a kind of refuge. Sophie, with her childlike innocence, seemed to sense what was happening even though the adults tried to hide it. She adored Carla and often nudged Peter to talk about how fun it was to live there in the cafe. "The cafe has magic," Sophie would say with an enchanting smile. And perhaps, deep down, she was right. The space that once seemed a place of problems and debts was now also a scene of light moments, unexpected laughter, and glances that said more than words. The relationship between Peter and Carla became a point of balance. They supported each other, shared failures, and celebrated small victories. The closeness, the complicity, and the way they were both willing to fight together for that place made the boundary between work and personal life begin to blur. Peter noticed how Carla's smile brightened his days, but he felt the weight of uncertainty. He feared that his feelings for Carla could ruin everything. After all, he was still trying to rebuild his life, and caring for Sophie was his top priority. Carla, in turn, felt the same dilemma. She knew she needed to keep her focus on the cafe, but the moments spent with Peter became increasingly significant. Both felt the connection grow, but neither was ready to admit what they really felt. Every gesture, every look, added a new layer of complexity to their relationship. Carla felt nervous when Peter smiled in an unassuming way, and Peter felt torn between his responsibility and the desire to be closer to her. But for now, they continued to focus on the cafe as if it could shield them from the vulnerability that was approaching. Yet, it was undeniable that something bigger was at play, something beyond debts or the cafe's success. Sophie, always playing around them, was the only one who seemed comfortable with the situation. The little girl already saw Peter and Carla as a team. "You two are the best together," she'd say with the purity of a child who doesn't carry the same insecurities as adults. Peter would smile, but inside, he felt conflicted. He wanted to secure a future for Sophie, but he couldn't deny that his feelings for Carla were growing day by day. He just didn't know how or if he should take the next step. As the days went by, the tension between Peter and Carla grew, but it wasn't negative. It was the anticipation of something to come, a feeling they both shared but didn't know how to handle. Their relationship was both simple and complex, and with each moment spent together at the cafe, it became clear that the connection between them couldn't be ignored for much longer. The cafe, which began as a temporary refuge, was now the backdrop for something much bigger, a new life and, possibly, a new love. The once empty and quiet place now had more customers, especially on days when Peter organized live music nights or family game events. The community, initially resistant to the changes, now began to see the cafe in a new light. Peter and Carla's efforts were finally starting to bear fruit. Peter felt a sense of relief every time he saw the cafe full. Every time a new customer walked in, he remembered why he was there, why he had taken on that challenge. Revitalizing the cafe was not just about business but about the chance to build something new for himself, for Sophie, and for Carla. Watching the cafe thrive was like a reflection of his own rebirth. Every little success, every satisfied customer, brought back the confidence he had lost over the difficult months. Carla, in turn, began to relax. For the first time in a long time, she saw a future for the cafe. The debts were still there, but the increased customer flow brought new hope. She observed Peter with admiration. The man who entered the cafe as a stranger was now transforming the place she loved so much. More than that, Peter had become someone essential in her life, filling her with a mix of gratitude and feelings she didn't know how to handle completely. But not everything was simple. The initial success of the cafe came with its own challenges. The number of customers increased, and the pressure to keep up the pace grew. Peter worked tirelessly, staying up late planning new promotions, while Carla tried to keep up with the growing workload in the cafe. They were exhausted, but there was a new energy in the air, a sense of renewal that kept them moving. Each day, the cafe became more and more a vibrant meeting point for the community. Sophie, as always, was at the center of everything. She ran between tables, playing and helping as she could, bringing lightness to the environment. Peter knew everything he did was for her, and seeing his daughter's smile motivated him to keep going, even when exhaustion threatened to overcome him. He looked at the cafe, at Carla, at Sophie, and felt that he was finally rebuilding the life he thought he had lost. The cafe was no longer just a workplace but a symbol of his own resurgence. With the growing success, Peter and Carla began to think about expanding ideas for the cafe. Peter suggested creating regular weekly events, such as poetry nights and small performances by local artists. Carla, who had previously hesitated to move away from the traditional model, now embraced Peter's ideas enthusiastically. They knew that to keep the cafe thriving, they would need to continue innovating and attracting new audiences. Together, they were willing to face whatever it took to make the cafe a true landmark in the city. Despite the progress, there were still moments of doubt. Peter and Carla knew the cafe's success was fragile and that any misstep could bring everything down. But the trust they were building, both in their work and in each other, drove them forward. With each new day, with each challenge overcome, their relationship grew stronger, and the cafe, which began as a place on the brink of failure, became a warm and lively space. Revitalizing the cafe gave new meaning to Peter's life. He once again saw himself as someone capable of making a difference, someone who could use his skills to create something positive. And alongside Carla, he began to envision a brighter future, a future that went beyond the cafe. The place had become the center of something greater, something that involved not only work but also the building of a new life. Peter, Sophie, and Carla formed, in a way, a team, and the cafe was the bond that held them together. Now, with the cafe revitalized and the community more present than ever, Peter and Carla knew the next step wasn't just ensuring the business's success but understanding what the place truly meant to both of them. Revitalizing the cafe was only the beginning, and the future, still full of uncertainties, held promises of new discoveries and something they had avoided confronting directly, the possibility of a life together. Their relationship had transformed. They were no longer just business partners but also life partners. The nights spent at the cafe, once dedicated to discussions about events and marketing strategies, were now moments where they shared dreams, fears, and hopes. There was comfort in being together, and each other's company became increasingly essential. Peter still found himself surprised at how quickly things had changed. Months ago, he and Sophie had nowhere to go. Now, he felt he was building not only a new home but a new life. Carla, with her strength and sensitivity, had become an indispensable part of this journey. And Peter, despite all his insecurities, began to realize that his feelings for her went beyond gratitude or partnership. He was falling in love. Carla, on the other hand, also felt the transformation. Peter and Sophie had brought something into her life that she hadn't realized was missing. Before, the cafe was all she had, the only legacy left of her family. But now, with Peter by her side, she felt she could create something new, something that belonged to them. Sophie, with her contagious joy, had become a constant presence in her days, and Carla couldn't imagine her life without that little family. Each day, the connection between the three grew stronger. Peter and Carla, once cautious with their feelings, could no longer ignore what was happening. The laughter that once stemmed solely from work now mingled with moments of affection and care. There was a lightness in the air that made everything easier, simpler. Even with challenges still ahead, the feeling of being together, building something bigger, gave Peter and Carla new confidence. Sophie, always attentive and full of energy, noticed the change before everyone else. She adored Carla and already considered her part of their small family. The two spent hours together at the cafe, organizing tables and decorating the place with Sophie's drawings. For her, Peter and Carla were inseparable, and she didn't understand why the adults seemed so cautious about something that, to her, was so clear. Sophie, in the innocence of her 7 years, saw the happiness in her father's eyes and the affection in Carla's gestures. One of those nights, with the cafe empty after a busy day, Peter and Carla finally admitted what they felt. They didn't need many words. It was clear in their glances, in the smiles exchanged as they tidied the tables and closed the register. Their relationship had long since moved beyond the boundaries of work. The cafe, which initially was just a chance to start over, was now the symbol of something greater, the beginning of a new family. The decision to be together came naturally, Without grand declarations, only the certainty that their lives were indeed connected. Peter, Carla, and Sophie formed an unlikely but perfect trio in their simplicity. The cafe had become the place where they not only rebuilt their lives but also found each other. Each smile, each gesture, confirmed that, despite the hardships, they had found something many searched for all their lives: a home amid the chaos.